So, I have been feeling a lot of pressure lately, especially since I've turned 30 to get married and to have kids. Actually, no, I think I've been feeling it for a few years, but turning 30 was kind of like the last storm.
Is that pressure that like your family is putting on you, or is it your own pressure, like your own internal biological clock?
I think it's a bit of both, and then also societal pressure, right? Which definitely
True. Yeah.
does impact. I'm sure my internal pressure is impacted by or influenced by societal pressure.
Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to get married and have children. And I still don't have either of the two. And like as you get older, it's awkward. It's weird because you see other people doing those things. And then I feel like even if you yourself aren't sure if you want them, it's still awkward to see other people getting married and having kids and like doing the quote unquote like adult things, right?
I guess, but at the same time, for me, yeah, I do have that pressure that is building up day by day. But I mean, it's not like, yeah, just gonna explode, huh?
Anyway, what do you do when you want to have a family, want to have children, but you don't have a partner? I only know like a couple of people who have made a decision on their own to have children, be a single parent, you
Yeah.
know.
And also, why does a family have to be two parents and at least one kid?
I
Right?
mean, it doesn't have to be. No, it doesn't have to be. There's all kinds of families.
Yeah. I think when most people think about families or a family, you think about multiple parents and then you think about at least one child. But that's not always how things end up for some people. No, I was going to say, and sometimes it's out of choice. It's not always because they couldn't find a husband or they couldn't find a wife or a spouse or a partner.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just want to have kids and you don't really necessarily want the partner. There's nothing wrong with, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a single parent, even if you've made that decision, on your own. I mean, as long as you can support the child or children, as long as you can support your family, it's fine.
Yeah. And yourself, if you can support
Well, yeah,
yourself.
you should also support yourself. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing then too is how do you go about becoming that single parent, right? If it's your decision to become one, how do you go about it? Do you have an agreement with somebody that like, hey, like, are you going to be my helper, my sperm donor, whatever you wish to call that person? Do you go to a sperm bank? Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few different ways to go about it. Cassie decided to become a single parent by choice due to obstacles in her life. She overcame these obstacles and was blessed with her firstborn child.
I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to this journey. I grew up, like I said before, not seeing any really great examples of romantic relationships or marriage. My parents divorced when I was 6 years old. And even before that, even when they were married, my dad was carrying on affairs, one of which two children from, one before I was born and one a couple of years after I was born. So that wasn't obviously great. And so he was always in and out, even when my parents were married, because he was kind of living a double life. And then even further back from that, my grandparents were married for many years, but my grandfather always carried on affairs. He never had children outside the marriage, but still, he was a good dad and a good provider, but not the best husband. In my early 30s, discovered that I had some fertility issues, some things that would cause challenges in terms of having kids in the traditional way. So I knew that I would have to probably use IVF or IUI or some fertility treatment to have children. I was in a long-term relationship for 6 years with, I guess, my college sweetheart. And when that relationship ended, I realized that, the years are going really quickly and I need to do something. But I still didn't make a decision at that point about single motherhood. I was in another relationship for a few years, and we actually started the fertility treatments together. And when that relationship didn't work, at that point I was 35 going on 36, and I just decided I don't want to keep waiting to see if something, some other relationship starts and is great. Because again, I never really saw good relationships. So it just made me think that's probably not going to happen for me. So I gave myself a little bit of time to grieve the loss of that relationship, and then got started on my journey to single motherhood. So I had already known at that point that I'd have to do IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, because I had to have surgery to have my fallopian tubes removed because they were damaged. So the fertility clinic kind of walks you through the whole process. And so you get your own personal nurse, of course, your doctor, but there's a team of doctors who you meet with and who work on your case, but you get your own nurse. And I told my nurse that I had decided that I was going to do this on my own. They gave me a couple of sperm banks or cryobanks to reach out to. And I found that California Cryobank had what I was looking for. And that being the most important thing to me was that they had open ID donors, which means that the child is able to meet that person when they're 18 if they choose to do so. So I got started with that process. But I'm obviously really thankful that this is even an option, because I don't know that traditional parenthood or marriage relationships is for everybody. I'm not sure that it's for me, but I always knew as a very young girl that I wanted to be a mother. That was a mother and a therapist. Those were the only two things I was sure of. And once I got my clinical licensure and became a full psychotherapist, I was like, the only thing left to do is become a mother. So yeah, if I think back, even as a little girl, I think I told you guys this, when my friends and I would play house, my husband was never even a factor in make-believe. It wasn't something that was ever really important to me. If I met someone and things were right, then yeah, I would have gotten married. But the most important thing was being a mom. So
Thanks, Cassie. So it seems like motherhood was really the only thing that was missing, right, for you after you got your MSW and you got licensed. So, what was it about motherhood that really wanted you to become a part of it?
that's a great question. I think, I like I said, the marriages in my life that I saw weren't great, but I saw some really great mothers and their relationships with their kids. And I thought, even like I said, if I think back to, very early in my childhood, I wanted that. My mom always seemed really happy to be with me. And my grandmother loved being with her kids, even though they were adults. Obviously, I didn't see them when they were little with her, but she always said that she was so thankful to be a mom, that it was really the greatest gift. And as I got older, my mom told me more about her own struggles to have children. She had some miscarriages before me, one after me, and then a stillbirth. And so I'm the only child that she had that survived and was born. And just the way that she and my grandmother and my cousins and aunts would talk about motherhood. So,
And being a single mom and having going through IVF, what has been most people's reaction?
I was pleasantly surprised. My family was super supportive. My mom, my uncle, and my church. When I told them, they were just like, "Oh, okay," and everybody kind of just went back to what they were doing. It was like, "Congratulations! We can't wait to meet the baby." And then I remember a couple of the older women in my church who have known me since I was little were like, "Oh, wait, if there's no father, that means that we get this baby all to ourselves. Like, we don't have to share the baby with anybody. So this is great." And I did have some family members that were a little caught off guard, I guess is the right way to put it, and had a lot of questions. My godmother in particular had a ton of questions because, it just wasn't something that she had grown up hearing about. It just wasn't the norm. It's not what she's seen. But I only had one family member who I had told her ahead of time that I used a donor, but she thought that I had broken up with my ex and was calling him a donor, and in like kind of anger, or like, I guess, like the young people say, like throwing some shade at him. But I wasn't. I literally meant that, like, I got a donor. So when she found out that it was that I used an anonymous male donor, she had a lot of questions and was asking me, didn't I think that was selfish and it's not fair to the kid to not have a dad? And it was actually her daughter. She has her oldest child is in her 20s, and she was there at the time. And she said to her, "Don't you think that's wrong what Cassie's doing?" Like, and her child is going to want to know, where's my dad and stuff. And she said, "I actually don't think it's wrong, because she's going to figure out how she wants to explain it." She already said, she talked about, meaning me, I had talked about some of the terminology and how you don't use the word dad. She said, "I don't think it's wrong, because at least her kid is never going to feel like there's somebody out there that just didn't want me." Right? Like, my mom was in a relationship with this person, said she was pregnant, and then they kind of just disappeared. She said, I feel like that probably feels a lot different than my siblings' lived experience. And that was really profound for me, because I had gone through those struggles myself with my own dad. So so it was important to me, or it meant a lot to me to hear her say that. And so that was the only not so great reaction that I got, but everyone else was really supportive and just excited for me that I was finally going to be a mom.
So you talked a little bit about your family, your mother and your father. I guess, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with your father when you were growing up?
My dad wasn't, and is still now, somebody who is a lot of fun. He was a really fun dad. He would play Barbies with me and tea party and take me to the park. And he was very gentle. I would sometimes sneak and watch scary movies when I wasn't supposed to. And my mom would say, "Well, now you just have to sleep by yourself and deal with it because I told you not to watch those things. And my dad would come back in the room and whisper to me, she's so mean. I'm going to come lay with you. And he would come sleep with me until I fell asleep. But, now as an adult, I can look back and realize that that was all he was fun. He was really just like a big kid and didn't take responsibility for a lot of things. And when anything serious would come up, my mom would tell him that I went to private schools when we lived in New York. And my mom would tell him, Cassie, school fee is this much, how much do you want to give me towards it? Or we're going on vacation. Let's start putting some money together to start saving up for our Disney trip this year. And he'd disappear for 2 or 3 weeks and then come back, I guess, when he figured like, all right, she's probably forgotten about that. She's not going to ask me for anything, or even if it didn't have to do with money, but it was just something important, a doctor's appointment or my christening. My family often tells the story about how my mom and my godmother had to go looking around New York, around the Bronx for him the night before. So I think there are some wonderful fathers out there. But I guess because of how I grew up with my dad so in and out of my life, I don't think that you have to have a dad to turn out okay. At this point now, my father is in his mid-70s. He is recovering from cancer, and we're starting to try to get some type of a relationship. And he has been for the last few months that I've been back in contact with him more consistent. And he understands that obviously if he isn't, then I'm not going to have him around because I wouldn't let him do to Ivy what he did to me. But yeah, that's been my understanding of or my relationship with my dad. And I think I told you guys this when we spoke before, but I can remember like being at my friend Danielle's house when I was probably about 5 or 6, before my parents got divorced. And I had spent a few days there with them. And her dad went to work and he came home. He went to work and he came home. And I was like, your dad keeps coming home. And she was like, yeah, he lives here. I was like, I know, but my dad lives with me too, but sometimes he doesn't come home for a lot of days. I was really little, so I probably didn't know like 2 weeks through. I was like, for a lot of days, he doesn't come home. And she was just like, oh, okay. And then we just went back to playing because, we were kids. But I can remember, I can in my mind see us playing, kneeled down by her bed, playing with our Barbies, having that conversation. And at that age, we only really remember things from like age 5 and earlier if they were of real significance or if we had some kind of trauma. And so I think that was pretty significant because it really stayed with me like, oh, wow, what's happening in my house is probably not normal. It's probably weird.
I remember you talking about, your mother would talk about your father in a way where it's like, oh, he's just not really an adult, right? That kind of thing.
Right.
And now that you're an adult, has she had a conversation with you about it, her relationship with your father and that dynamic? Or
Yes. My mom never, I probably said this to you guys before, was really good about not saying anything really disparaging about my dad. But, now that I'm older, yes, there's obviously more that I know and understand. One of the things that I think, my mom will say often that led her to be in a relationship with my dad, to stay with him so long, get married to him, and continue to stay even after all of the infidelity is just obviously what she saw growing up. And also the fact that she had never really dated before that. So it was like he was really all she'd ever known. And it took her, so she'll say now, like, it took me a while to recognize, like, wow, not only is this not okay and fair to me, but it's certainly not fair to my kid. And so when she talks about that, she never told me this story until I was much older, but there was a father-daughter breakfast at my school when I was in preschool. And she had gotten me, when she talks about it now, she actually still gets a little tearful. She had got me a sailor suit with the blue pleated skirt and the white top and sailor tie to wear. And my dad hadn't been home the night before, but she called his mom's house and she said, he'll be there in the morning. Don't worry. He remembers. Of course, he didn't show up. And her mom says she sat outside the apartment building waiting for him. She said with me there with her for over an hour. And finally, she just took me back inside and she said she was sobbing because she thought, like, what am I doing to my little girl? You know, just so that I stay married. And like, I'm trying to give her this life that I guess, you know, I have in my head how things should be, but it's not working out. And, you know, I was too little to know what was going on, but she said she kept thinking eventually she's going to know. And like, when is enough going to be enough? And so when she talks about my dad now and stories like that, she says to me, like, how proud she is of me, that she knows that some days are really exhausting and hard, but that making the choice to not have a kid with somebody who I knew probably wasn't going to be a good dad or even a good partner was really a really good decision to make and a sound decision. And she's just really proud of me for taking that route.
Cassie, can you tell us the process of IVF? How was that physically and mentally?
Sure. So I am very religious. I'm Episcopalian. It's similar to Catholic. My Episcopalian friends call it like diet Catholic because we have female priests. We were, I think, if not the first, one of the first Christian religions to marry gay and lesbian couples. So we're like Catholic light. We have some of the same beliefs as them and Sunday mass rituals, but definitely a lot more liberal as a religion. So anyway, I'm very religious. And so I know with IVF, there's no guarantees. So mentally, I prepared myself by praying a lot. I got on my prayer list at church. I told my priest and we prayed privately. And I did what's in the Catholic religion, what's called a novena. It's like a 9-day prayer. So at some point later on in the process of IVF, when I started the hormone therapy and stuff, is when I did the novena. I did one to St. Jude because he's not only the patron saint of kids, but also of hopeless things. And I thought, this, again, there's no guarantees, but IVF is sometimes can feel really hopeless. And so that really, my faith got me through the mental part of it. But there were certainly days that I got scared, even being somebody who's religious and has like a tremendous amount of faith. I'm human. And some days I would get scared, like, what if I'm so hopeful and I have all this faith and it still doesn't work? And I would get really scared, thinking like, what am I going to do if this doesn't work? Like, first of all, it's very expensive. So I had to take out a fertility loan to pay for the process because my insurance at the time didn't cover anything past finding out that you need fertility treatments. So they would pay for the blood work and stuff in the beginning. And then once you find out you need interventions to have kids, then you're on your own. So I remember thinking, like, if this doesn't work, I don't have any more money to do this. I then had to pay out of pocket for some of the medication and, of course, for the sperm. That's not something that the loan covered. So I was able to do that. But I just remember thinking, like, I'm going to get really depressed. And I would sometimes joke with my family, but I was probably a little bit serious to it. Tell them, like, if this doesn't work, then you guys just kind of set a schedule and everybody come visit me in the mental hospital because I'm not going to make it. Like, mentally, I'm going to be done. Because I really, like, again, the only two things I ever was sure that I wanted was to be a therapist and a mom. And I could have looked into adoption, I guess, a little more if it didn't work, but that's also super expensive. So that was the mental aspect. I had, like I said, my days, but for the most part, I stayed faithful and tried to stay busy that summer that I was doing the IVF treatment, spending a lot of time with friends and family. I love movies, and the beach. So I tried to do that as often as I could that summer. And I'll talk more about the process itself. But at some point in the process, before the embryo transfer, you have like a break from any fertility pills or needles. So I went to New Orleans with my friend I think we went for like 5 nights and 6 days or something. It was really nice. It was just a good way to relax. And I don't think during that trip I really thought much about the fertility treatments. I tried to really focus on sightseeing and dancing and drinking and just having a good time. But as far as the physical part, it can be really invasive. I don't know much about IUI because that's when they trying to think how to explain it. There is some level of insemination sometimes with IUI, but it's a little less invasive because you still have fallopian tubes, right? And they still usually work well, so they can just put the sperm in the vagina and the sperm just do their thing. They just want to make sure that it's at the optimal time, like the highest chance of fertility. But with IVF, there's usually some surgery involved at first, and that's really the healing and aftercare of that can be really painful. And so that was difficult.
So when Cassie mentioned IVF, that's a term I had heard before, but I was still a little unsure of the actual definition, and I had never heard of IUI, so I decided to look up the definitions of each procedure, so we would all have a pretty good idea of what Cassie was actually talking about. IVF, or in vitro fertilization, is a procedure where an egg is fertilized by sperm outside of the body. The eggs are retrieved from the ovaries, and the fertilized embryo is then transferred to the uterus. IUI, on the other hand, stands for intrauterine insemination. With IUI, sperm is placed directly into the uterus with a small catheter. The idea is to improve the chances of fertilization. This is done by increasing the number of sperm that are able to reach the fallopian tubes during the time that women are most fertile. This is most often performed when donor sperm is being used. So Cassie used IVF, and that's because their fallopian tubes were damaged. So when you have damage to any reproductive organs and they may not function properly, that's when you would use IVF. So IUI is just that bit of assistance when you're using, let's say, donor sperm, right? When the sperm just need a little bit of help getting to their destination.
After that, the hormones that you have to take, the pills, I didn't have any like mood swings or anything, but I remember just feeling a lot of discomfort. You have to take estrogen, and I can't remember the name of all the medications, I'm sorry, but something else helps to produce more eggs because during a regular ovulation cycle, women produce like 1 egg, sometimes 2. But in order to get as many eggs as possible, you need to take this medication, in order for them to retrieve as many eggs as possible, they want to try to increase your ovulation in one cycle. And I remember I went to probably like a week before I had the egg retrieval. I went to a Yankees game with my friend, and I couldn't even concentrate on the game. You feel so swollen and all this pressure, because now you have like all these eggs and follicles that are huge that would not have ordinarily been so big. And it feels like something pressing down on your bladder. I was walking strange. I'm sure people at the stadium like, what the hell is wrong with her? Like, if she needed a wheelchair, like, just say that, dude. Like, stop walking like that. It was so, I was like, why did I come? But then I had the retrieval, and they put you to sleep for it. It's like a surgery. But afterwards, I was still sore for about a week, but then I was fine. The hardest part of that was the emotional part, because you could hear them telling other people on the other side of the curtain, a few like beds down from you, like, oh, you got 30 eggs. That was great. Or saying to somebody, you got 6, and you could hear the person sound disappointed, and they're like, no, that's a great number. And I'm thinking, you're lying. There's no way that's a great number. And then they came and told me I got 10. And I told the nurse, like, maybe they should go back in and look for some more. Maybe the doctor forgot some, because 10 is not a good number. Like, I could do better. And she said that she assured me it was a great number. But the reason that I felt like it wasn't a good number is because then they have to wait for those eggs to mature enough to be fertilized. So you wait a few days, and you hear from that 10, they'll call you and say, like, and I don't remember my exact numbers. This was like almost 3 years ago, but they will call and say, well, today, there's 6 that made it to the next stage, and we'll check again in the next couple of days. And so I think I went in with like 6 that out of the 10 that were mature enough to be fertilized. So then they take the sperm, they mix it with the egg, and then they see after a few days how many have been fertilized. And they did that. And I remember them calling and telling me, like, okay, now of those 6 that were fertilized, we only have 5, but that's okay. That's enough. Let's see how they do after some more days. So we wait some more days, and they call and they said, now we have 4. I'm like, oh my God. So I remember them calling and telling me that one day I was at work when they called. And at the time I was a supervisor of an outpatient program. So I had my own office, and I closed the door, and I took my St. Jude rosary beads, and the floor, it was the hospital where I worked. The floor was so hard, it's cement. And I got down on my knees and just started praying. Like, people, I remember saying to God, people always say that you don't give us more than we can bear. This not working out is not something I can bear. I promise you, despite what you might think. I know you're God and you know better than me, but I promise you I won't make it. And then I said my prayer to St. Jude, and then they called and said that I had 3, and they were mature enough. They had been fertilized, but those embryos were mature enough to be sent out for testing. And then you wait a few weeks before you get those results back. So I went to New Orleans, and when I came back, they told me that of those 3, only 2 of them made it through the test. One of them didn't make it. And of those 2, only 1 came back perfectly healthy, had the highest chance of pregnancy success, and no genetic issues that showed up, anything like Down syndrome or spina bifida, those things that they test for. And not spina bifida, I'm sorry, cerebral palsy, I think, is one that they can test for. And so they did that, and they said, but the other one came back inconclusive. So the doctor said, I'm going to send it back out for testing at no cost to you because I'm just curious to see what result we get. But we know that this one is healthy. And I didn't want to know the sex of the baby, but the nurse, at the time I got a new nurse. My nurse had gotten a promotion, and she said, so on September 18th, we're going to transfer your healthy baby girl. I was like, oh my God, why did she do that? Because now it felt like, of course I want a girl, right? When I was little, when I played house, I always had a daughter. And yeah, I think most women want a girl. And I thought, well, now the stakes are even higher. So if this doesn't work, I'm going to be even more devastated. I felt like if I don't know the sex, then I can still, pray and want this baby to grow and be healthy. But I didn't want to put too much into it, right? Like I didn't want to know the sex and name the baby and then have a miscarriage or something. So I was so upset that she told me, but I said, okay, that's fine. And I decided then that I was going to look at the list of baby names that I had been developing over like probably like an 8-year period. I had been adding to the list, taking things off, and Ivy was one of the names that I really liked. And then I had in my novena to St. Jude in this 9-day prayer at the end, you always want to let the saint know what you're going to do for them if this, whatever you're praying for, works out. And I promised St. Jude that whether it was a boy or girl, I would put his name somewhere in there and always tell people about him. And of course, tell the child about him and all that he did for me. And so I thought Ivy Jude sounded nice. And I thought, okay, since I know your name, I'm going to start talking to you as if you are here. And so the minute I left from the embryo transfer that day, I got in the car and my mom was driving and we put on some country music. And I told Ivy, I was like, this is country music. And then I changed the station to pop music. And I was like, this is pop, and some rock music and some hip hop. And I told her, you're in the car right now with your grandmother and your auntie, and we all can't wait to meet you. And I talked to her every day on the way to work. And I just kept saying, all you have to do is grow and mommy will do the rest. That's it. And I really feel like it ended up being a good thing that I knew the gender and that I chose a name. And yeah, it was a good thing.
I know we mentioned that IVF is expensive, and I know you mentioned the loans. I guess, how did the idea of IVF come about for you?
I had to because I had an ectopic pregnancy. And because of that, that just means that the baby was growing somewhere outside of the uterus. And I had to end up having emergency surgery because the baby was growing in my fallopian tubes, in one of my fallopian tubes, and the tube burst. And then, so the other tube was damaged probably from the trauma of the one tube bursting. And there was blood everywhere. And so I didn't have a choice. So even if I were married or I had stayed with the person I was in a relationship with at the time, that was the only way that I was going to be able to become pregnant.
Is it uncommon to get pregnant during the first IVF cycle?
You know what? That's a good question. I don't know the numbers, but I know that from the single moms by choice groups that I'm in and the fertility clinic, when I was going through it, had a Facebook group. I know just from those women that it's definitely unusual. Yeah. So I definitely felt blessed by that because I know how unusual that is. People usually have to do 2 or 3 cycles. And sometimes, unfortunately for some people, it's even more than that.
So I think a really important part of the story is your daughter, right? She's the focal point.
Yes.
So have you thought about if you're going to tell your daughter her story? And if so, when do you think is a good time?
Well, part of the process of becoming a single mom by choice, the fertility clinic has you meet with their social worker. And that's one of the things that she and I talked about. And she said, she gave me some really great resources, some good tips about how to start that conversation. And one of the things she said was start it now. While you're pregnant, start practicing a kid-friendly way to explain that. Read some of the children's literature that's out there about, their births, their origin story. And so I started early on, and I've gotten to a place where I'm at least comfortable with what I'm telling her now. And then at the next stage of life, I'll figure out, depending on Ivy and what she understands and what questions she has. But basically just that she was so wanted that even though I didn't have a husband or a partner, I went to the doctor and he helped me to find a really nice man who had, one of the books talks about this, so I didn't make this up on my own, some magic beans, and he helped me to have her. And so one of the things that is really important is not to use the word dad or donor dad, because it can imply to a child that there's somebody out there that is my father but doesn't want to be my father, when really it was just a helper, just this person that wants to help people to become a family. And so he helped us do that. And when she's older, if she wants to, she can meet him and say thank you. But yeah, I've started, like I said, having that conversation with her. And it's funny because most kids at her age will associate every man they see with dad. And she doesn't. Instead, because she only has uncles and no dad, every man that she sees, she says that's an uncle. And every woman is somebody's mom. That's a mama. So she loves Daniel Tiger. And when we read his books, I'm like, that's Daniel's mommy and Daniel's daddy. And she says, no, Ma, that's Daniel uncle. I go, okay, yes, that's Daniel's uncle. So I know she doesn't quite understand it yet, but she's getting there. Yesterday, my mom was actually reading it to her and she said, Daniel dad. So yeah. And then I have some books about different types of families. COVID really put a wrench in certain things, but I've joined the Single Moms by Choice group that I mentioned, and their kids are a little bit older, but I think it's important for her to see families that look like hers. Families. I have really close friends that I grew up with, are two women who are married and they have a daughter. So she'll see families who look like the families in her storybooks that we have about different types of families. So yeah, we started the conversation.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I was going to ask, how, if you do merge your professional life and your personal experience, because you are a therapist, and if you've ever thought about having your own group.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. My family has been bringing that up a lot lately. Like, why don't you figure out a way to start some kind of, even like a therapy group for single parents by choice? Because it's very different. One of my friends, thank you, teases me a lot and says like, oh yeah, single mom by choice. I'm not sure what the difference between that and a regular single mom is, but okay. But there is a difference, right? The difference is that we made the conscious decision to have a child on our own, knowing that there may be some difficulties, and also preparing ahead of time for that. It's a very different experience than what my mom went through. even before the divorce, but certainly after the divorce, and what, some of my cousins have gone through and are still going through, where they didn't expect to be single parents. And it just was kind of thrust on them. Very different.
So I wanted to kind of go back to, when you had mentioned, your family having certain opinions about you being a single mom by choice and doing IVF. Has anyone outside of your family, have you ever heard any criticism or comments from anyone outside of your family in regards to being a single mom by choice?
I don't think so. No. Yeah, it was mainly like that one cousin who, like I said, was like stunned, couldn't believe it, and had all these questions, but they felt more like accusations than questions at the time. She did later apologize and say that she realized and recognized that I made the right decision for myself and for my child. But yeah, no, not any strangers that I can think of. I know a lot of people in the Facebook group that I'm on write often about having like close friends who will tell them like that they're selfish or, have some negative opinion. If someone thinks something like in my extended family, I don't know about it. Like no one has ever said to me or like a friend's parents or anything like that. I worried about that a little bit, but no one has said anything.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a stigma attached to single moms by choice?
Yeah, I would say yes. I think that probably more so, years ago, by me mentioning it in church, someone who I've known for years, who's been a member of our church, told me that her oldest child was through an anonymous male donor, and that she was a single mom by choice. And he's 16 or 17. So I didn't know that. And I think it's because there was some discomfort, some fear of judgment. So she just never said anything. I think most of us at church just assumed that she was married or in a relationship and it didn't work out, and she was a single in church who she adopted a child. She's white and he's black, so it was obvious that she adopted him. So we knew that, but I think most of us thought she adopted him and then her and her husband divorced, because she just never spoke about it until I said it. And then the two of them came forward and like, yeah, we're single moms by choice too. The one who has the 17-year-old child said that, back when she did it, it really wasn't a popular thing to do. There weren't any support groups, or actually there was one, but of course it wasn't social media related. It was like, I think based in New York, and you paid like a membership fee and you would go to like an annual meeting or something, but that was about it. And nobody talked about it. It wasn't something that you said proudly. But I think if anything, the stigma is that it's self-centered. But I always think that there's some selfishness in wanting to be a parent in general and bring people into this world, right? Like there's no time in the history of the world that's been safe and peaceful, or just perfectly happy and like, oh my God, I want to share this with somebody because it's such a perfect place to be. It's really not. So there's some self-centeredness in it in general. So I don't think we're any more selfish than any other parents or families.
I'm going to go back to the donor and just why did you choose that particular donor?
I'm so glad that you asked that, Zoe. I was hoping that we would get to that we'd have time to. So it was, the other reason it was really important for me to do this is not just the single motherhood, the IVF journey, but also I'm hoping that someone or some people, men of color listening, will get out there and donate sperm. Not that I really did not care one way or the other what the donor what his ethnic or racial background was. But I remember thinking, if I were married or in a relationship and for some reason had to use a male donor, it would be really difficult because there aren't many men of color. And I don't just mean Black men, I mean Black men, Indian men, Asian men. There's just not a lot to choose from. There are mainly white men who donate. And so that's why the donor that I chose, Ivy's helper, right? Not dad, but helper, happened to be a white male. That was part of the reason. There was one guy who, so the other thing is that if you're going to donate and you can, I don't know people's personal, issues or reasons for not being an open ID donor, but that's really important for this person to be able to look you up when they're 18 and say thank you or ask you questions about yourself. And I'm sure there's a lot of curiosity about who this person is, because I chose based on who had the genetic makeup that was going to yield the safest pregnancy and the less chance of any issues for the child, like something like sickle cell or even mental health issues were taken into account. So what happens is when you choose a donor, they do blood work on you. Of course, the donor has had blood work done and they see who's the best genetic match. So they tell you to pick 5 people. And then of those 5, the genetic specialist is going to call you and go through why this person would be a good match. This one is a definite no. This one is a little, iffy for different reasons. And so it turned out that the person that was the best genetic match for me was this white male. And then the other thing was that it was, like I said, important for me that the person was an open ID donor. You say hi?
No need to get crazy. Yeah.
Chandi's funny? Yes. Yes, Chandi's fun. Sorry, guys.
Hello, little one.
Say hi. So I'm glad that you asked that, Zoe, because I think it's important. Like I said, if you're in a couple, it's probably important that the person resemble you a little bit. Thank you, guys. This was really good to be able to talk about this, and I hope that people hear it and they get something out of it.
Yeah. I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
I know I have, so.
Oh, I'm glad.
I think she ended up just fine.
Yeah, I agree. I think she did.
She has a cute baby. She has a good job. And she has a support system to help her take care of Ivy. So, I mean, who says that you can't be a single mom by choice?
I mean, I think things are changing in society where it's more acceptable. It's becoming more common, right? That people realize they don't need to have all of these traditional things in place to have the family that they want, right? They can still have the family.
Yeah.
They can still have a family.
Yeah. And I think it's about choice. You have more ways of doing things than you used to in the past. So it's not just having a baby the traditional way, but you could do it through IVF, or you can even have a surrogate deliver your baby.
It's not as though she didn't want to have that partner, right? At times she did. Her relationship with her father had a profound effect on the way that she sees relationships. Because her father wasn't always there, do you think that had an effect on her and how she sees the world and views relationships?
I definitely do. What happens in your childhood really does determine how certain aspects of your life are going to end up, or how you make decisions in certain aspects of your life. There really is no cookie cutter definition for a family, how a family is supposed to look, what a family is supposed to be. They come in all shapes and sizes. And you've heard from Cassie's story that this is all she ever wanted. All she ever wanted was a child. And luckily for her, she was able to make that happen with the limited resources that she had. I hope that's inspiration to you all who's thinking about having a child in a non-traditional way.
So that's going to do for this episode of Bound by the Cloak. Check out our site, social media, show notes, any updates on Cassie.
And stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you next time.